running shoes. These are great for running, but not great for much else. There's a high heel, usually a lot of cushioning, and often a narrow toe box that's going to help them propel you forward when you're running, but make them not very functional for strength training or anything really that's not running or walking. Especially if you're doing any kind of squatting or hip hinge motions, running shoes can actually really work against you. They can make your form worse and also increase your risk of injury.
3, 2, 1, yeah!
Welcome back to another episode of the Helix Healthcast. I'm your host, Zach Morgan, and I am excited to get into today's topic because we are going to be talking all about accessories. I myself love getting new gear for the gym. I'm sure you do too. Who doesn't love spending money? But I want to make sure that you are spending it on the right things and that you're using them in the right way. You've probably seen that guy at the gym that's got knee sleeves and gloves and wrist wraps and grip tape and every other accessory you could possibly find for the gym. And he might be overdoing it a little bit, but that doesn't mean that each of those items doesn't have a use. We just want to make sure that you're using the right ones in the right way. What was it that Coco Chanel said about when you put on a bunch of accessories, the last one you should take off? Because we probably don't need all of them. I don't know how many other fitness podcasts are out here quoting Coco Chanel, but what she said is right. We want to make sure we're using accessories for their proper use and not overusing them. So in this episode, I'm going to give you the lowdown on what is worth buying, but also when and how you should be using it. The first thing that I want to get into is shoes. We all love shoes. I have probably too many pairs, but it's because I want to make sure that I have the right pair for the right thing. There are a ton of different types of workout shoes. And I'm not saying you need to go buy a dozen different pairs and have a different pair for every kind of workout, but I do want to make sure that you have the right shoes for what you're doing so that you can get the most out of your workout, but also avoid injury. So let's talk about a couple different types of shoes so that you can make the right choice. The first one that I want to talk about is running shoes. These are great for running, but not great for much else. There's a high heel, usually a lot of cushioning, and often a narrow toe box that's going to help them propel you forward when you're running, but make them not very functional for strength training or anything really that's not running or walking. Especially if you're doing any kind of squatting or hip hinge motions, running shoes can actually really work against you. They can make your form worse and also increase your risk of injury. Running shoes are made to push you forward. When we're running, we want to have that forward lean. Running has often been described by running coaches as falling forward and catching yourself over and over again. And so when you're running, you want that forward lean. You want to be falling forward. You want the weight on your toes. But when we're squatting, deadlifting, or doing a lot of strength or functional movements, we actually want the opposite of that. We want to really be able to keep our feet planted and keep our torso as upright as possible. So running shoes can cause a lot of instability, inefficient mechanics, and they can also cause possible knee or ankle issues by putting the pressure where we don't want it and keeping us from being able to engage the right muscles and have our joints in a really optimal position. So as much as I love running shoes and I love to get a new pair when I am running, I would say if you're doing strength training, then you might want to stay away from them. Here at Helix, I have often had people take their shoes off when we're squatting or deadlifting. Obviously, an upper body day, it doesn't really matter where it's comfortable, but because they're usually better off barefoot than in running shoes, especially if there's really excessive cushioning in them. So what should you be getting? I personally am a big fan of what I will call functional fitness shoes. There's different types and there's different ways you could go with it, but these are really made to be well-rounded and good for just about everything. They usually do have some kind of heel, but it's a little bit more firm and it's more of like a wedge. So it's meant there to support you, to help with strength movements, and to give you that support without pushing you forward. So there will often be some kind of heel that can vary in different shoes, but it's not going to be the excessive cushioned heel like a running shoe has. It's not going to have the same kind of drop that's meant to push you forward. They're usually soft enough for short runs or some running, although I wouldn't suggest doing too much running in them. But if you're doing a workout that involves some kind of short running or sprinting, they're going to work well for that. They're flexible and light enough to do things like box jumps and other plyometric movements, but they're still stable enough that you can do squats, deadlifts, and Olympic lifts in them without losing that stability. So I would say that if you're just going to have one type of workout shoe, then a functional fitness shoe is probably going to be best. There's some that are a little bit more heavy duty if you're doing a lot of like heavy lifting in them. And then there's some that are a little bit more light and flexible if you're not going quite as heavy, but if you're doing a lot of plyometric movements or a lot of explosive movements, then they're going to be good for that. A couple suggestions I would have for shoes, for functional fitness shoes, are going to be the Reebok Nanos. Those are my go-tos. They're a little bit wider. They have a little wider toe box than some others. I have really flat, wide feet, and so some shoes are just too narrow for me. If you do have a high arch or more narrow feet, then there's some others that could be good, like the Nike Metcon. The new Metcon 9s are really good, although honestly, you could probably find a lot of 8s on sale still. There's not that much of a difference between the 8s and 9s, and so you can get a really good deal on them, especially if you listen when this podcast comes out. Maybe by the time you listen to this, the 10s are out. You might be able to get a good deal on the 9s, but those are going to be a little bit more on that heavy duty side. They're still pretty light and flexible, but they also make a Metcon Free that's going to be a little bit lighter, a little bit more flexible. Again, if you're doing more plyometric movements, then the Metcon Frees are going to be good, but the regular Metcons are going to be good if you're mixing in a little bit more heavy strength training. Some other good options are the TYR trainers, or TYR. They're known as a swim brand, but they've been venturing into the functional fitness space a lot lately, and their new trainers are really great. I'm a fan of them. You could also get the Nobles. Nobles are going to be a little bit more flat. They don't have as much of a heel, but a lot of people love their Nobles. I've had a couple pairs, although like I said, the Nanos are my go-tos. I've now gone through like my last 4 or 5 pairs of general workout shoes have been Reebok Nanos. Some of you might also want to check out some zero drop shoes. These are going to be more minimalistic in their design and their feel. As the name says, they don't have an elevated heel. They are zero drop. They are flat, usually with more of a thin sole so that you can feel the floor a little better. Some of the benefits of these are they're going to help strengthen your feet. They're going to force you to really work on your balance and stability. But for a lot of people, they can also be more comfortable, especially if you've dealt with some foot issues and you need to work on that strength and stability in your foot. You might want to check out some zero drop shoes. They're also really great for anyone who likes to squat more flat footed. Some people like a heel, like a wedge. Some people like to squat really flat footed. They are really, really good for deadlifts because we want to have a flat foot. We want to be able to keep our weight back, stay really planted in deadlifts because they're going to help you put more of your force down into the floor. And they're also great for plyometric movements like box jumps, running, lunges, stuff like that, because they're super flexible. So they allow you to really move the way that your foot is meant to move. Some really good options for zero drop shoes are the Flux. It's like a really good breathable knit. There's also the Innovate. They have some zero drop shoes. Innovate is INOV and then the number 8. Also Xero, as the name says, they specialize in zero drop shoes. It's spelled XERO. And there's also the new Avancus, AVANCUS. These are newer shoes meant specifically for powerlifters. So if you're looking for some zero drop shoes that are great for squats and deadlifts that have a good grip to the floor when you are lifting heavy, but that are zero drop, you might want to check out the Avancus. And then probably the most popular is Vivo Barefoot. They're great shoes, although in my opinion, they're a bit overpriced. Some of these others you can get for half the price of Vivo Barefoot. But if you have the budget, Vivo Barefoot are great and they look pretty cool too. So if you're looking for zero drop shoes, again, Flux, Xero with an X, Innovate with the number 8, Avancus, or Vivo Barefoot. The last type of shoe that I want to talk about is lifting shoes, specifically like a powerlifting or Olympic lifting shoe. They are probably unnecessary for anyone starting out or just trying to be generally fit, but they're really great for anyone a little bit more advanced that's looking for that extra boost, or anyone looking to compete in powerlifting or Olympic lifting. They're going to be pretty heavy and clunky, so you wouldn't want to do much else in them. Definitely wouldn't want to run in them. Probably wouldn't even want to do box jumps in them. But they are super supportive for weightlifting, for those like really heavy 1 rep max or like low rep heavyweight movements. For squats, they're like having that wedge under your heel. You may have seen some people squat with a plate or a wedge under their heel. The shoes are basically going to have that. It's a high heel, but it's a really hard, firm wedge under your heel. And they're going to allow you to stay a little bit more upright, helping you engage the right muscles, helping you maintain a good torso position, and just squat with better technique and produce more force into the floor and help lift that bar up. For Olympic lifting, they're also going to help you catch a cleaner snatch in a more upright position without your heel coming up. So they're going to allow you to have a better position in the catch, which is going to help you get under that bar and be able to stand it up better. If you are looking to invest in some lifting shoes, what I will say is that while they're a little bit expensive, they last for years because you're wearing them just for certain movements and you're not doing as much plyometric stuff in them. You're probably not going to wear them outside at all. They're going to last you for a really, really long time. So even though they're a little bit more pricey up front, you can get your money's worth out of them. I personally love my Nike Romaleos. They're a classic weightlifting shoe. They've been around for a while, so there's been a lot of work put into them. You can also check out the Tyr lifters, TYR. They're lifters. If I was to get a pair today, these might be the pair I get. They have a little bit wider toe box than the Romaleos. They weren't around when I bought my lifting shoes, so they weren't an option. But from what I hear, they're great. I've seen them. I've checked them out. I personally haven't lifted in them, but if I'm getting a new pair, that's probably what I'm going with. If you want something a little bit more affordable, you can also look at like the Savaleos, which are another Nike shoe. They're meant to be their more affordable weightlifting shoe option. You can also check out DoWin is another company that makes a more affordable lifting shoe. Innovate makes a lifting shoe. The Reebok Legacy lifters are really good, but I would probably look at the Nike Romaleos, the Savaleos for a more budget-friendly option, or the TYR lifters. So that's it for shoes. Now let's talk about lifting belts. What a lifting belt is meant to do is help you with bracing. What a lot of people think a lifting belt is for is back support. And while it does give you some back support, that is a benefit. What it's really meant to do is help you with bracing your core during heavy lifts. When we lift, we want to brace our core, which basically means as we take a big breath in, we're pushing out against our diaphragm. A belt is like having a second external diaphragm that's giving you something to push against. So when you take that breath in, you're able to push out against the belt and really lock that tightness in when it comes to your core and bracing it. The biggest mistake I see people make when wearing a belt is honestly just wearing it too often. Like I said, it's going to help you brace, help you get help you strengthen your core, or help you get a tighter core. But we don't want to depend on the belt. If you never lift without it, then you're never going to strengthen your core. You're always going to be depending on that belt to help. We want to strengthen our diaphragm as much as we can. And then when we are lifting those higher percentages closer to our 1 rep max, that's when we put on the belt to give us that extra support. I personally don't put on my belt until at least 80-85% of my max. If I'm feeling good, I start doing my warm-up sets without the belt. Then when it starts to feel really heavy and I feel like I need that extra support, that's when I put it on. But I want to really work on strengthening my core. So I don't wear it during accessory work. I don't wear it during my warm-up sets, just for those really heavy sets. If you are going to wear it all the time for every set, then you're probably not going to strengthen your core. And if you one day have to lift without your belt, you're going to suffer. A couple different types of belts that you could look at, that you could get, are either leather or nylon belts. That's usually the two main categories. Thicker leather belts are used by powerlifters for things like squats and deadlifts. They're going to be really strong and durable, but because they're wider and a lot thicker, they're going to limit your mobility. So for Olympic lifting, a thick powerlifting style leather belt isn't going to allow you to get into the position that you need to get in as easily. So I would usually, in that case, look at a nylon belt. Nylon belts are used for Olympic lifting, also often used for functional fitness or CrossFit. They're a little bit more flexible, so they'll give you the mobility that you need to get into some of those positions where you need that flexibility. They'll also allow for really quick loosening and tightening because it's usually a Velcro strap. So if you're doing some kind of conditioning workout, CrossFit workout, metabolic conditioning that has multiple movements, you could tighten it for deadlifts. And then if you're going straight into box jumps, you could loosen it for that. So it allows you to keep the belt on and not have to fuss with it, but just kind of quickly tighten and loosen it. If you're going with a leather belt, you're usually going to be looking at either some kind of buckle or a lever. Most people start with the buckle, just like your regular belt buckle. It's going to allow you to get it pretty tight, allow for you to adjust it. A lever belt involves this thick, big, heavy lever. You have to set it to one setting, so you can't tighten it, loosen it as easily, but it's going to allow you to basically clamp down on the lever, get it super tight, and then quickly release it. So for anyone who is competing in powerlifting or looks to continue to advance, a lever belt might be a really good option because you can just quickly snap it tight right before you lift and then immediately release it. Because if you're wearing a belt correctly, it should be really, really tight. If you can walk around in between sets with it on, it's not tight enough. So a lever belt's going to help you with that. Most people will start with a buckle. If you've never worn a belt before, I would probably suggest starting with a nylon belt. It's going to be a little bit more comfortable. It's going to help you learn to use the belt and make sure you get the most out of it, make sure you're using it properly, and then you can always move up to a leather belt when you become a little bit more advanced. I also want to talk a little bit about knee sleeves to make sure that you're really using them for the right reasons. There are two main benefits of knee sleeves. One is support, and the other is to help keep our knees warm during exercise. Support is often going to come from a thicker knee sleeve. Sometimes it has supports on the sides, but really any knee sleeve is going to help keep your knees warm, which is going to improve blood flow, which can help you reduce knee pain and stiffness. Most knee sleeves, the most common type of knee sleeves that we see are a neoprene knee sleeve. These cover the full knee. Sometimes they'll have a hole where your kneecap is, but I myself often wear just the full knee sleeves that cover everything. The neoprene knee sleeves usually come in either 3 millimeter, 5 millimeter, or 7 millimeter. 3 millimeter can be harder to find, but the thickness is going to kind of depend on what you're using it for. A thinner knee sleeve is going to be good for if you're doing more cardio, more plyometric movements, and you want that mobility that comes with just a thinner, more flexible knee sleeve. Whereas thicker is going to be good for strength movements where you want more support or where you really need that thickness. So if you're a powerlifter who's squatting in them and that's about it, then you might want thicker. If you're doing a little bit of everything, if you're running in it, doing box jumps, and also doing some squatting, then you might want to go with a slightly thinner knee sleeve. I myself have a pair of 5 millimeter that I use when I'm doing conditioning or like some metabolic conditioning workouts. And then I have a 7 millimeter knee sleeve that I use when I'm doing squats or Olympic lifting. So I have both. I figure I'll go ahead and spend the money on two separate pairs, and then each one will last a little longer, and I'll be able to use the pair that coordinates with what I'm doing. Some people might also want a super thick, really stiff knee sleeve. These are going to be specialized for powerlifters. They're really hard to get on and off, really, really hard to get on, but they're going to give you some bounce out of the bottom of the squat. These are probably unnecessary for anyone that's not competing in powerlifting. So if you're competing, check them out. If you don't have any plans of competing, then you probably don't need them. And they're honestly more fuss than they're worth if you're just trying to get stronger. You might also see some knee sleeves that have those supports on the sides. So they might have like some springs or some rods with like a hinge. These are going to give you a ton of support and are good for anyone who might be coming back from injury or have some major knee issues, major mobility issues, but they are going to limit your mobility a little bit more. So I would really only suggest those if someone has a need for them because of a previous injury or if they're coming back from that injury. Usually a doctor would tell you to get them, but if you're just looking for some general support, then look at neoprene knee sleeves. I also want to talk a little bit about wrist wraps. We've talked about knee support. Now let's talk about wrist support. Name's pretty straightforward. They wrap around your wrist to give it some support. But they're going to give you that support for pressing movements. Like a belt, I wouldn't suggest wearing it all the time because then your joint's not going to get stronger on its own. We don't want to depend on a wrist wrap for everything we do. We want to be able to work on our strength and mobility in that joint and then add in a wrist wrap when we need it. Use them when you're going heavy or when you're doing lots of reps, or if you have a wrist issue where you need that extra little bit of support, but allow your wrist to get stronger, more mobile without them. There's a couple different types of wrist wraps that you could look at. The general ones that you're going to see the most are those stretchy, thicker wraps that have the thumb loop and then the Velcro shut. You can get a shorter one if you just need it to wrap around once or twice. If you want to kind of keep it on throughout the workout, or you can get some really long ones that allow you to wrap it around a few times and get a ton of support. For anyone who's really looking to do heavy bench press or overhead press, you might want a little longer one. For most people, especially if they're your first pair, I would go with a shorter length. You can also look at some cloth wraps, often called strength wraps if you see them online. They're good for if you just need some light support. They're a long stretch of cloth that you wrap around, and then they have this little string that kind of tucks in. And they're great because they allow you to quickly tighten it or loosen it. All you do is you squeeze it on your wrist and twist, and it'll get tighter, or you can kind of squeeze and then twist the other way to loosen it. So if you're doing some kind of metabolic conditioning, or if you want to loosen it in between movements, they're a really good option. They're going to give you some support, but still allow for a little bit more mobility in the wrist. The last kind that I'm going to talk about are leather wrist wraps. These are really mostly used by Olympic lifters because they want a lot of support, but you don't need much mobility or flexibility in your wrist for Olympic lifting, especially for something like a snatch. They will give you that support, but they're probably not going to be the most comfortable for most people who aren't used to wearing wrist wraps. So I wouldn't suggest starting off with leather wrist wraps. There's something that you probably want to build up to once you've kind of advanced past others. They're going to be super durable, and to be honest, they look pretty cool, but like I said, they're not the most comfortable. A couple brands that I would look at for wrist wraps are Onyx or Rogue. Onyx is a Olympic lifting brand, so if you do want leather ones, they're a good option. Rogue is going to have a lot of good wrist wrap options, both the cloth and the kind of stretchy ones, so I would check them out. You can also look on Amazon. There's a ton of affordable ones that you can find there. The last accessory that I'm going to go over are lifting straps. These are going to help you hold more weight. They allow you to grip more and save your grip. They are great for strength movements, but again, like I've said with both belts and wrist wraps, the biggest mistake that I see people make is they overuse them. They will allow you to hold more weight, but you don't want to depend on them. They're used by powerlifters, Olympic lifters, strongman competitors, bodybuilders, and they should be an accessory that's only used when you're not worried about strengthening your grip. So the most common type that you'll see is like the powerlifting strongman straps. It goes around your wrist, and then you kind of loop it a couple times around the bar, grab it, you can kind of twist, turn it in a little bit, and they'll take some pressure off your grip by holding some of that weight in the strap that's around your wrist. The reason I say you don't want to overuse them is that because they're taking pressure off of your grip, if you use them for everything all the time, your grip's not going to get stronger on its own. So we want to use them when the stimulus of the exercise is meant to be something other than the grip, and you don't want your grip to be what holds you back. So if you're trying to get better at deadlifting, you probably want to do most of your deadlifts without straps. But then if you were doing like some RDLs where you're trying to get more reps, you don't want your grip to fatigue, or maybe it's already tired from what you did before, then straps are going to be a great option. If you're doing something like lat pull downs with a wider grip where it's harder to get a hold of the bar, straps are going to be great because, again, you're trying to work your back. The goal of the exercise is not your grip, but we want to be strengthening our grip when we can, and then use the straps when we need to. You can also get some Olympic lifting straps. They're going to look kind of similar, but they go around your wrist and then quickly go around the bar, not as many times. They're going to allow for a quicker release. So if you're doing something like a clean or a snatch and you fail that rep, they're going to allow you to quickly release the bar so that it doesn't pull with it. So strongman powerlifting grips are great for things like deadlifts, rows, lat pull downs, RDLs. Olympic lifting straps are good if you're doing cleans or snatches. A couple brands that I would look at, again, Rogue, they've got some really good straps of both types. Onyx, like I said before, they make the Olympic lifting wrist wraps. They also make some really good straps of both types. Or again, you can look on Amazon. There's going to be some really good options. Lifting straps are super affordable, so they're a good thing to have in your gym bag. Just make sure you're using them the right way. That is all I've got for gym accessories for this episode. There are some more we could get into, and if you have questions about any of them, feel free to reach out. But that's all I wanted to cover for today's episode. If you have any questions or topics you'd like to hear us cover, or just any feedback, we'd love to hear it. You can email us at podcast@helixgyms.com. If you could subscribe, maybe leave us a rating, we'd really appreciate it. And if you do want to support us, there's a couple ways you could do that. You can go to our website, www.helixgyms.com, where we've got an online merch shop, we've got some ebooks, and you can also follow our programming if you want to. There's a link there. So if you don't live close enough to come to our gym, but you need some workouts to do, you like our style, you can check out our programming. The first week is free, so you can see if you like it before you have to commit. Thank you all so much for listening, and thank you for your support, and I'll see you on the next episode.